My name is Vera Montgomery. I was 28 when the woman I loved sat across from me at our kitchen table and asked for permission to leave. She didn't call it that, of course. She called it clarity. She said she needed to know, once and for all, whether the life she'd chosen with me was really the one she wanted, or whether she was still holding a door open somewhere in her heart for the man she'd left 3 years ago. She said his name the way you'd say the name of a house you used to live in. Familiar. Aching. Unfinished. I just need to see, she said. If it doesn't work with him, I'll know. I'll come back to you, and I'll mean it completely. I remember the light in that kitchen. Late afternoon, gold and heavy, falling across the ring I'd given her 4 months earlier. She hadn't taken it off. That detail would come to matter more than she knew. I didn't shout. I want to be honest about that because everyone expects the shouting, the broken glass, the door slammed so hard the frame splits. None of that happened. I sat very still and felt something in my chest fold quietly and on itself, like a letter being put away in a drawer for later. And if he doesn't fail? I asked. What happens to me then? She didn't answer. She just looked at the ring on her finger as if she'd forgotten it was there. I want to tell you I refused. I want to tell you I stood up and ended it right then, with dignity, with a clean line drawn in the sand. But grief doesn't move that fast. Grief negotiates. Grief tells you that maybe if you're patient enough, if you're generous enough, the person will realize what they had. So I said yes. I told her to go. What I didn't tell her was that somewhere underneath the ache, a quieter, steadier part of me had already begun taking notes, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I had spent 3 years learning who Elena was in the small hours, in the ordinary moments no one else witnessed. I knew her patterns. I knew what she ran toward and what she ran from. And some instinct, older and wiser than my heartbreak, told me this wasn't really about him at all. It was about her never having closed a door in her life. She'd just like to leave them open, so she'd never have to feel the weight of a decision. That night, after she packed a bag and left for her sister's apartment to think, I sat alone in the home we'd built together and made a decision of my own. I wasn't going to wait by the door like a woman in an old film, wringing her hands. I was going to live, fully, deliberately, without her as the center of it. If she came back, she would come back to someone whole, not someone who had spent the interim months hollowed out and waiting. I had no idea, that first night, how far that decision would carry me. The weeks that followed had a strange, suspended quality, like holding your breath underwater and not being sure when it's safe to surface. Elena texted sometimes. Small, careful messages, thinking of you. Hope you're okay. The kind of text a person sends when they want to keep a door propped open without admitting they're doing it. I answered plainly, without warmth and without coldness. I had learned, somewhere in my professional life as a financial analyst, that the most dangerous thing you can do with incomplete information is react to it emotionally. So I didn't react. I observed. I began seeing a therapist not because I thought I was broken, but because I refused to let this become the story that defined me. Dr. Whitfield had a habit of letting silences stretch until I filled them myself, and in one of those silences, I said something I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. I think she wants me to fight for her, I said. But I think fighting for her would mean fighting against myself. She didn't respond right away. She let me sit with that. My sister, Naomi, was less patient than Dr. Whitfield. She showed up one Saturday with coffee and an expression that told me she wasn't leaving until she'd said her piece. You know this isn't fair to you, she said. A break isn't a break when there's a scoreboard. She's not choosing between two men. She's choosing whether she gets to keep both options until one of them expires. I didn't argue with her. I'd already arrived at the same conclusion on my own, in the quiet hours when the apartment felt too large for one person. But knowing something and acting on it are different disciplines entirely. So, I did what I do best. I made a plan, not a plan for revenge, not yet, but a plan for living. I threw myself back into work, closed a merger I'd been circling for months, and felt something in me steady with the small, ordinary satisfaction of competence. I started running again, early mornings, the city gray and unclaimed. I let old friendships breathe back to life, The ones that had quietly gone dormant while I'd folded myself smaller and smaller to fit into a relationship that asked more of me than it gave back. Somewhere in the second month, I stopped checking my phone the moment I woke up. That was the first sign that something in me had shifted. Not healed. Not yet, but shifted. The way a house settles after a storm, finding a new kind of balance in the aftermath. I didn't know yet that Elena's arrangement with her ex was already beginning to unravel, quietly, in a city 40 minutes away. I only knew that for the first time in weeks, I recognized my own reflection again. It was Naomi who found the box. Elena had left a few things behind in the hallway closet. Nothing dramatic, just an accumulation of forgotten sweaters and a small wooden box she'd once called her keepsakes, the kind of container everyone has and no one thinks twice about. Naomi was helping me reorganize the apartment, an act that felt less like moving on and more like reclaiming territory, when she found it tucked behind a stack of old textbooks. I almost told her to put it away unopened. Some instinct told me whatever was inside wasn't mine to see. But there was a folded letter on top, addressed not to me, but clearly meant to be found by whoever went looking, a habit Elena had, of writing things down she couldn't say aloud, then leaving them somewhere they might be discovered instead of delivered. I read it standing in the hallway, afternoon light slanting through the blinds in thin gold bars across the floor. It wasn't a confession of love for her ex. It was something sadder and more human than that. It was a letter to herself, dated over a year before she'd ever asked me for a break, in which she admitted she didn't know how to want something without also wanting an exit from it. She wrote about her parents' marriage, about watching her mother stay in something that had long since gone quiet and gray, and about promising herself she would never let herself get trapped that way, that she would always keep one hand on the door. "I don't think I know how to stay," she'd written. "Even when staying is what I want." I sat down right there on the hallway floor, the letter in my lap, and felt something complicated move through me. Not vindication, not yet, but recognition. This had never really been about her ex, or even about me. It was about a fear so old it had calcified into a personality trait. It didn't excuse what she'd asked of me, but it explained it. I thought about calling her right then. I thought about a dozen different versions of the conversation, the compassionate one, the furious one, the version where I forgave everything simply because I finally understood it. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and put it back exactly where I'd found it. Some truths aren't yours to use as leverage. They're just yours to understand. But understanding, I was learning, doesn't obligate you to keep waiting. 3 months in, Elena called instead of texting, and I knew before I answered that something had changed. Her voice had a rawness to it I hadn't heard since the early days of our relationship, when she still let herself be unguarded with me. She told me things hadn't gone the way she expected with Julian, that he'd fallen back into old patterns almost immediately, the same instability, the same emotional unavailability that had ended things between them the first time. "I think I made a mistake," she said. "I think I need to come home." There it was. The scoreboard Naomi had warned me about, finally showing its numbers. He had failed the test, and now I was supposed to be waiting on the other side of the finish line, arms open, exactly where she'd left me. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I found myself looking at the apartment around me, not the apartment we'd shared, but the smaller, brighter one I'd moved into during month 2, the one with the reading chair by the window that was entirely, unapologetically mine. I thought about the 6 a.m. runs, the merger I'd closed, the friendships I'd let breathe back into color. I thought about the letter in the wooden box, about a woman who didn't know how to stay even when staying was what she wanted. "I'm glad you're figuring some things out," I said finally. "I mean that. But I'm not a place you return to when your other options run out." She was quiet on the line. I could hear her breathing, uneven, the sound of someone realizing the door they'd left open had, at some point without ceremony, been closed from the other side. "I never meant to make you feel like an option," she said. "I know you didn't mean to," I said. "That's almost worse." I want to be honest, there was no triumph in that moment. No satisfaction in the way revenge is supposed to feel in the stories we're told. There was only a clean, quiet grief, the kind that comes when you finally stop hoping for something you've already secretly let go of. I hope you find whatever it is that lets you stay somewhere, I told her. I really do. I just can't be the place you practice on. I ended the call gently. No slammed phone. No dramatic silence. Just the soft click of a door closing that had needed to close for a long time. People love to imagine that the aftermath of a story like this ends in one of two ways: reconciliation, tearful and cinematic, or a cold, satisfying triumph where the wronged party watches the other person crumble. Mine ended in neither. In the weeks after that phone call, Elena texted a few more times. Apologies, mostly, some of them genuine, some of them still tangled in her old habit of wanting reassurance more than she wanted accountability. I answered when I had something honest to say, and I let the silences stand when I didn't. What surprised me most wasn't her absence. I had already grieved that, in installments, over months. What surprised me was how much space it left for things I'd forgotten I loved. I signed up for a watercolor class on Tuesday evenings, something I hadn't done since university, and found myself absurdly moved by how badly I painted at first, how little it mattered. Naomi and I started a standing Sunday dinner, just the two of us, where we talked about everything except Elena, and I noticed, weeks in, that I'd stopped bracing for the conversation to circle back to her. Dr. Whitfield asked me once, near the end of a session, whether I felt I'd gotten justice. I thought about that word for a long time before I answered. I don't think I wanted justice, I said. I think I wanted to stop needing her to choose me in order to feel like I mattered. And now I choose myself first. Everything else is just details. It wasn't a revelation that arrived all at once, in a single cinematic instant. It arrived the way most true things do, slowly, in fragments, across ordinary Tuesday evenings and badly painted watercolors and a sister who kept showing up with coffee even when I no longer needed convincing. I still thought about Elena sometimes. I probably always would, in the way you think about a chapter of your life that shaped you even after you've closed the book. But the thinking had lost its gravity. It no longer pulled me toward her. It simply existed, quiet and settled, alongside everything else I was building. A year after that phone call, I ran into Elena at a mutual friend's engagement party. One of those small, unavoidable collisions that life arranges when you least expect it. She looked older, not in years but in something harder to name. Tired in the particular way people look tired when they've been running from the same thing for a long time without outrunning it. We spoke for a few minutes, polite and careful, the way people do when there's history between them that neither wants to reopen at a party. She told me she wasn't seeing anyone. She told me, almost as an afterthought, that she'd started therapy of her own, working through what she called the leaving thing. Her words, offered with a small, rueful smile that suggested she knew exactly how it sounded. I read something you wrote once, I said, before I could stop myself, about keeping one hand on the door. Her face changed, surprise, then something more vulnerable underneath it. The letter, she said quietly. You found it. Naomi did. I read it and put it back. Why didn't you ever say anything? I thought about that question longer than she probably expected. Because it wasn't mine to use against you, I said. It was just something that helped me understand you weren't rejecting me. You were protecting yourself from something that had nothing to do with me at all. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her doing the same thing I had done, months earlier, in that hallway, turning understanding over in her hands, weighing whether it changed anything. I'm sorry, she said finally, for all of it. The break, the waiting, treating you like a fallback. I know, I said. And I meant it, the way you mean forgiveness that's already been fully processed, rather than freshly offered. I hope you find whatever helps you stay, Elena. I mean that. We didn't exchange numbers. We didn't promise to stay in touch. Some doors are better left closed gently, without ceremony, without the false comfort of pretending they might reopen. I watched her walk back into the party, smaller in the crowd than I remembered her being in my life, and felt something in my chest that wasn't grief and wasn't triumph. It was simply peace, the quiet, unremarkable kind that doesn't announce itself, that just settles into the spaces where old pain used to live. In the months that followed, I found myself telling this story to almost no one, and when I did, I told it differently than I expected to. I didn't tell it as a story about a woman who was wronged and then vindicated. I told it as a story about the slow, unglamorous work of choosing yourself in the absence of any guarantee that it would look impressive from the outside. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public reckoning, just months of early runs and badly painted watercolors and Sunday dinners with my sister, stitched together into something that eventually became a life I didn't have to survive, a life I actually wanted to be inside of. My mother asked me once, gently, whether I regretted saying yes to the break in the first place, whether I wished I'd fought harder to keep the door from opening at all. No, I told her, and I was surprised by how true it felt. If I'd fought to keep her, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering whether she stayed because she wanted to, or because I made leaving too costly. This way, whatever she chooses, it's actually hers. And whatever I've built, that's actually mine. There's a particular kind of strength that doesn't look like strength while you're living it. It looks like getting out of bed on the mornings you'd rather not. It looks like answering a phone call calmly instead of desperately. It looks like reading a stranger's or a lover's most private fear and choosing not to weaponize it, even when you'd have every justification to. I think, in the end, that was the only revenge I ever really wanted. Not her suffering, not her regret, though I imagine some part of her still carries it. Just the quiet, undeniable proof that I could lose someone I loved and still, somehow, not lose myself. It's autumn again as I write this. 2 years after the afternoon Elena sat across from me in the golden kitchen light and asked for a door I didn't know yet I had the strength to close. I live alone now, in the apartment with a reading chair by the window, though alone has come to mean something different than it once did, full of Sunday dinners and watercolor Tuesdays and the particular, hard-won contentment of a life built on my own terms. Sometimes, in the early mornings when the city is still gray and unclaimed, I think about that wooden box in the hallway closet, about a letter that was never meant for me and that I chose, in the end, not to use as a weapon. I think about how easy it would have been to let that discovery turn me bitter, to let it become the story I told at dinner parties for sympathy or vindication. Instead, it became something quieter, a kind of permission, proof that some people carry fears so old they mistake them for the truth about who they are, and that understanding this doesn't obligate you to keep waiting for them to outgrow it. I don't know if Elena ever learned to stay. I hope, wherever she is, that she found it, that steadiness she was always circling and never quite trusting. I hold no anger toward her anymore, only a kind of distant tenderness for who we both used to be, back when we thought love was something you tested rather than something you simply chose, over and over, in the ordinary light of ordinary days. As for me, I learned something that afternoon in the kitchen that took 2 years to fully understand, that the door someone else leaves open isn't always the one worth walking back through. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close it yourself, gently, and walk toward the life that's already waiting for you on the other side. My name is Vera Montgomery. I was 28 when I learned how to stay, not for someone else, but for myself. And that, in the end, was the only ending I ever needed.